F1 returns to Australia for the first time since 2019, and the Melbourne temporary street circuit has undergone several changes in a bid to increase passing opportunities. We'll be taking a look at exactly what's changed and all the latest news, including Las Vegas returning to the calendar next year. The recording date is Tuesday, the 5th of April. My name is Harry Benjamin. Alongside me, Crash's F1 editor Lewis Larkam and Formula One commentator for the likes of the BBC and Channel 4, Ben Edwards. Gents, lovely to have you both back again with us for our fourth episode now. Let's start there before we delve into all things Australia, which is obviously coming up this weekend. Shall we have a little look at what's happening, well, stateside, Ben? It seems that America is, well, it's always been, Formula One has always been wanting to crack America, and it seems like it's really making headway with Las Vegas coming onto the calendar next year. That makes it 3 US races in 2023. Is that too many? Is it great news? What are your thoughts on it?
It's fascinating, really, isn't it? Yeah, it's going to become the 12th different circuit in America that they've used for Formula One over the years. And they've been to Las Vegas before. They had a car park track there many years ago. I think it's going to be slightly better than that, so that's good. I think, understandably, with Liberty, being an American company that owns Formula One, and to be fair, it was something that Bernie Ecclestone, always wanted to do, was to get Formula One more integrated into the United States, and I think they are managing to achieve it. And talking to a guy I know who's based out in the States, and he knows how much it has changed, how much the interest in Formula One has changed over the last couple of years. He says basically from the lockdown period, as we all know, a lot of it's down to the Netflix Drive to Survive, and everyone was at home having to find something to watch. So that sort of amplified it even more. And he says that, people that he knew who would ask him what he did, and he said, I'm involved in Formula One, used to say, what's that? And now they're saying, oh, we watched the Grand Prix last weekend. What did you think of it? And there has honestly been a big build up, I think, in interest in the States. So I think it makes sense to have another race in the States. The other question about adding yet more numbers to the calendar is one we can come back to, but yeah.
Absolutely. Lewis, it's going to be an iconic race, isn't it? I think they're going to race down that strip in Las Vegas. It's going to be a night race as well. And as Ben alludes to, they did race back there. I think it was 1982, I think was the last time they raced in Vegas around that car park. It's exciting news. We haven't got an American driver yet, but with 3 American Grand Prix, adding alongside Miami, which debuts this year, of course, and COTA, which has been on the calendar since 2012, I believe. It's good news all round, and Formula One moving in the right direction. But it does have this, we could very easily get to 25 races next year, and already people are saying, well, 23, 22 is already too much.
Yeah, firstly, it's exciting news for F1. It's going to be a great event, a great location. There's no doubt about that. F1 continuing its bid to boost its popularity in the US, and as Ben mentioned, Netflix has been huge to that. Last year's USGP, we saw record attendance there, and now they have a sort of third flagship race, if you like, in Vegas. So it's all exciting from that point of view, but that obviously comes with the extra races, with Qatar joining on a 10-year deal next year. China should be returning next season as well. So you're looking at, as you say, 25 races there, and one's going to have to budge, because under the current Concord agreement, it's a maximum of 24 races for next season. So unless there was some kind of special agreement from the teams to increase that number, it will be 24 next year as a maximum. So yeah, then you're looking at which races are going to drop off, and the 3 that are going into their final year of the contract at the moment are France, Belgium, and Mexico. So they are the races that have uncertain futures, and perhaps the ones that are most likely to fall by the wayside for these added races in the US. And there's talk. Stefano Domenicali spoke to Sky recently and sort of hinted at there's enough interest for 25, even 30 races on the F1 calendar. And talk of potentially going back to Africa at some point in the near future. you do start to wonder when is it going to stop, because it is kind of getting to a point now where it's really pushing the limit of almost a race every weekend before you know it. And you've got to feel for the teams and the crews and everyone working in the sport. It's becoming so intense. I mean, already last season, with the short turnaround between last season and this season, it felt pretty intense. And yeah, talk of 25 plus races, you just wonder when is it gonna stop? When is that right balance going to be found? Yeah, it's personally, I'm feeling like we're already getting to the point of it being too much. So we'll see, but understandable why they want to add all these races, obviously, but it is becoming a bit of a, soon we'll have teams having two lots of crew rotating, and then there's the question of cost, and is that really going by what F1 is hoping to achieve by bringing costs down? If you've got two lots of race crew and rotating every department of each team, the cost escalates. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
And especially with the budget cap, of course, teams are watching every move they make when it comes to having to stay under that, and with it decreasing year on year as well. That's only going to add to the stress. Just finally on this, actually, because you bring up an interesting point as well. With those races that are in the final year of their contracts, I think we saw rumours as well this year that, perhaps it was Formula One, Domenicali, not threatening, but sort of intimating that, if tracks, classic tracks, Ben, like Monaco, like Spa, don't sort of modernize and get up to scratch and enable for good races, that they're in risk. But I can't imagine an F1 season without Monaco.
No, absolutely. And of course, there's a commercial side to that as well. Some of these new venues are going to be earning lots of money for Formula One way or the other. There'll be different ways of doing it. And in a way, it's a push on that side as well to some of those other tracks, I'm sure. Monaco, I think, I think it's very unlikely that would be dropped. But some of the ones that Lewis mentioned, the French Grand Prix, for example, has been a tricky one in recent years anyway. Thankfully, it has been back for a while, but not with a long contract. And it's not everybody's favourite. And yet we've got French drivers in Formula One, which is great to see. So it's a real balancing act. And it is hard. I mean, I think the calendar's getting too big myself, but that's my personal feel, and I feel for the teams, as you were saying, and how hard they have to work. On the other hand, I have a friend who's, has some health issues. He doesn't go out much. He stays at home, and he's always really happy when there's a Formula One on whichever weekend it is, So there are so many sides to this balance.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? Well, at the moment, Las Vegas has been confirmed for November next year. So, I'm sure it will be a spectacular event, and I'm sure Miami will be as well this year when that debuts on the calendar. But yes, that'll be a rolling question that continues to be debated as more and more races, potentially get added to the calendar. Let's move to some of the sort of on-track, off-track action that's happened in between now and Australia. And turning to Ferrari, I mentioned briefly there, Lewis, about the cost cap. And Mattia Binotto has been, I think, one of the more vocal team principals about making sure they, don't bring too many upgrades too quickly, because they've got to keep an eye on this cost cap. They can't just suddenly chuck a load of things at the car, spend millions on it for it to not work. But crucially, he says Ferrari in a much better place than when they were last challenging for the title in 2018. What have you made of Ferrari's sort of recent form? And do you think they're in a position now where they can really keep this momentum up and challenge for a title? They've had a great start, but what we've often seen with Ferrari is they might not be able to always stay up there.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that Ferrari are in probably the best place they have been for years. It's clear that the car is quick. They've got two great drivers. They so far have delivered in both races. But like you say, that is the big question mark with Ferrari. Is, as we've seen in the past, things tend to tail away, and the season, for some reason or other, tends to fall apart when it comes to sustaining that title bid. So that's really the big question mark with Ferrari this season. Can they sustain it? But I think there's no doubt that they are in the best position they've been for for a considerable amount of time. As you say, Mattea's talked about them sort of taking a cautious approach with the upgrade situation, which is a direct knock-on consequence of the budget cap. And I think a lot of teams have this balancing act with the development side of things. The Ferrari has gone pretty much undeveloped since the first test in Barcelona. They have a really good baseline with that car, and they're really confident that it's in a good place. But I think one of the big question marks is how is that going to change as the season goes on, when you've got Mercedes potentially sorting out their problems and catching up, and how aggressive are Red Bull going to be with their development. And I think that's one of the things to keep an eye on is, as the season goes on, how the sort of development war will potentially change the pecking order. Because at the moment, Ferrari are in a great place. They've got a great car. But will Red Bull ultimately catch up? There's talk of weight, the cars being overweight as well, and Red Bull potentially have a bit more weight to shed from the car than Ferrari. So again, could potentially be a little bit of time there to find from Red Bull's side that Ferrari don't have. How will that shape up over the coming races? We'll see. Ferrari are bringing their first upgrade in Imola, it sounds like, whereas Mercedes and Red Bull might be bringing some bits to Australia. So again, we'll have to see how it all pans out. But so far, you have to say that Ferrari are in a great position to fight for this World Championship. But the season is so long, 23 races, and we've only done 2 of them so far.
I think we need a bingo of how many times we say this race is so long, this calendar is so long. How many times are we going to say that until we get about halfway? But Ben, it's interesting. I listened to, I think it was Mark Genet on another podcast, God forbid, recently, talking about Charles Leclerc and how he thinks he's seeing a 2.0 version, a new version, a much more mature version of Leclerc. Are you seeing that as well?
That's an interesting one, because I think I was impressed by Leclerc from the beginning when he first came in, and he was Vettel's teammate. And I know there was a little bit of rawness in him, and a few there have been mistakes by him, and there were some last year. But I'm not sure if I suddenly see this maturity. I've been impressed with him from the start. I think last year he overtried a few times. He got that pole in Monaco and then hit the wall, and of course couldn't actually start the race after they discovered the damage. I think he was pushing super hard last year, because what else could he do? Now they're in a different position. I think the mindset is different now. So in a way, we're seeing that maturity, but I think in a way it's already there as a person. A young man who lost his dad at quite an early age, a dad who supported his racing throughout, and a lot of people have said to me he really has a very grounded sense to him. And I think it's just that now he's in a car that is in the right place. He can apply himself totally to it, and that's what we're seeing. So whether he's matured or not, I don't know. Mark Genet may well be right, but I think we are seeing a real contender. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, on the subject of that and pushing, McLaren certainly have a lot of work to do. Lando Norris coming out recently saying that they've lost a little bit of happiness in that team. They really thought they'd be much higher up the grid. Daniel Ricciardo, though, is said he thinks that, he wouldn't be surprised if they won a race this year. And I found that comment, fairly ballsy. But how quickly do we think McLaren can turn things around here? Obviously, Bennett was an upturn in pace compared to Bahrain out in Saudi Arabia. It's a return certainly for Daniel Ricciardo to his home race back on the grid. Is that going to give him a little extra boost? How quickly is it reasonable to expect McLaren can turn this around?
Yeah, I wonder, and I wonder if it's a bit of positive stuff coming out going into the Australian Grand Prix. They've got to stir up the fans, haven't they? And they've got to make sure that Daniel is making them feel as though there could be some success for them. But I do wonder a little bit whether they're going to be suddenly up there. There's this new layout of track which we were going to be talking about. Whether that's going to help them at all, I don't know. Honestly, don't know. Lewis, what do you think? I mean, do you think McLaren are going to suddenly come up with a surprise?
It's hard to imagine right now, isn't it? It seems like a pretty bold prospect to think of them fighting towards the front of the grid, given the first 2 races. no doubt they made progress in Saudi Arabia. That was far better compared to sort of woeful display we saw in Bahrain. But yeah, how quickly they can turn it around, it, it's a similar question, I think, for all the teams really, in terms of the development, how teams are still trying to understand and get the most out of their cars this year. A lot of teams still have big question marks over setup and how they can really extract all the performance that they have. So things could change quite dramatically as the year goes on, as teams bring developments and upgrades. So it's a question of how quickly they can get on top of that. They do have more wind tunnel and CFD time compared to some of their rivals, compared to the likes of Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull. So how will that factor into things? But yeah, it's just they need to be realistic at the same time, and it is going to take some time. Given how far off the pace they've been in the first two races, it's not going to be an overnight change. It will take time to sort of make those kind of inroads that they'll need to even just be at the front of the midfield pack again. But yeah, a big weekend for Daniel. Home race again. That should give him a confidence boost going into the weekend, and certainly extra motivation to perform. But yeah, it's difficult to see McLaren turning things around, in the next couple of races. But I'm sure they will get on top of their problems. It's just a question of how long that will take.
Absolutely, and there's so many things to watch out for this weekend, isn't it? Off the back of Saudi Arabia, you've got reliability issues starting to rear their heads in multiple teams as well, and so, of course, many drivers. Well, for some drivers, it might be their first time around Melbourne. Certainly, a lot of it's obviously an altered layout, so it will be brand new for all of them, really. Just before we delve into those track changes, Haas, I thought it'd be worth picking up on them. Obviously, everyone's so happy for them for a great start to the season. They've got good form, Lewis, as well, around Australia in the past, although their dreaded pit stop errors from a few years ago might still haunt them, but they were on for good results nonetheless. K-Mag return, I think he equaled his best result in Bahrain, which he achieved previously in Australia as well for Haas. But after that huge incident for Mick Schumacher in Saudi Arabia, who looks set for Q3 as well, let's not forget that. Do you think that perhaps is or will have dented his confidence ever so slightly coming into Australia?
Potentially. It was a huge crash, but F1 drivers have this remarkable ability to be able to, move on from these kind of incidents. It's just within their nature to do so. But there's no doubt that Mick could do with a confidence building weekend and result after the sort of start to the season that he's had, with obviously it's been Kevin who's been bringing home the results and achieving the sort of the headline for Haas. And you do wonder that if this sort of continues for too long, where Mick is, considerably further back than Kevin, you'd start to wonder how much that is going to affect his confidence, his mindset, and what kind of impact that might have on him. So yeah, I think it'd be really important for him to just have a clean weekend this weekend and not necessarily beat Kevin, because that's a tough ask. Like, Kevin's a fantastic driver and he's got the experience, but really just to be closer and have a more consistent weekend, and maybe try maybe nick that first point or two would be massive for Mick, for his confidence going forwards, because you do just sort of worry that he could sort of fall into a bit of a downward spiral and potentially let this get on top of him, because this is not something that he's faced before, because obviously last season he had the measure of Nikita comfortably, and it was sort of the reverse situation for him last year, so he had that confidence to build on, whereas you just wonder whether it might impact him if things continue to sort of go this way. But it should be a good weekend for Haas, based on the previous form, as you touched on. I think Grosjean finished sixth there in their first race in F1, which was a fantastic result for them. 2018, they had the pace. I think they were sixth and seventh in qualifying. As you mentioned, the pit stops, obviously it all went wrong there, but otherwise they would have been on for a strong double points finish. So it'll be interesting to see whether that form continues this weekend. If so, it could be a good weekend for Haas, who have obviously had a great start to the season.
Yeah, Ben, I don't know what you think as well on this. Mick, we talk about Mick a lot because I think everyone rates him really highly, but he has got a bit of a mountain to climb with Kevin Magnussen, and I suppose he needs to get some results on the board fairly quickly.
He does, yeah, and we've seen some mistakes from him in the past as well. He's talented, but he does make mistakes, and he's got to clear that up. But it's also going to be tricky this weekend because he hasn't raced at Melbourne before, and even though the track layout is slightly different, as we know, it is one that Kevin likes. He got that podium, that one and only podium when he was driving for McLaren. At this track. So it's a track that he'll feel awfully comfortable being back at, and we know the Haas is in good shape at the moment. So I think for Mick to keep up with him this weekend could be a challenge. But he's an intelligent guy, and he knows what he needs to do, and I think he will just keep applying himself. But it is a tough start to the season for him, there's no doubt.
Yeah, another big crash as well in Saudi Arabia because he repeated that the year before as well. But wishing them all the best nonetheless. Haas with good form around that track. But yeah, Ben, you touch on those track changes. Let's dive into that now, shall we? Return to Australia.